I'm Genevieve and this is Lauren, and today we're making whole wheat bread, which is not a quick bread because quick breads use chemical leavening agents such as baking soda or baking powder. Quick breads are examples like pancakes or muffins. Today we're using yeast as our leavening agent in our whole wheat bread.
The main ingredient, like Genevieve said, is whole wheat. It contains all aspects of the fruit as well as the maternal tissue. That means that it has the bran, the endosperm, and the germ. The bran comes from the maternal tissue, whereas the germ and the endosperm actually come from the fruit of the plant.
The difference in the germ and the endosperm is their ploidy. The germ is diploid while the endosperm is triploid. The germ is the product of the union of the sperm and the egg, and the endosperm is the product of the union of the sperm and the two polar bodies. The endosperm actually surrounds the germ and stores energy and nutrients for the germ.
Like I said before, the wheat is the important ingredient in our bread. It actually contains all four macromolecules, being the carbohydrates, proteins, lipids, and nucleic acids. Another important ingredient would be sugar. Sugar contains carbohydrates. You can use sugar from roots, so that would be like beet sugar, or today we're using sugar from the stem, so it's called cane sugar.
Another important of the mixture is the water. And it needs to be lukewarm or bath water temperature, which is between 100 and 110 degrees Fahrenheit. This is important because the yeast needs a warm environment to grow in, but it can't be too hot because then it will kill the yeast. So first we add the sugar to the warm water to create a warm environment with food for the yeast. We also add salt to this mixture, which slows the growth of the yeast and also serves as a flavor enhancer in this recipe.
Like Genevieve said, we have yeast. It's going to be our leavening agent. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to add it to this environment that Genevieve has made. And what the yeast is actually going to do, it's going to break down the sugars and turn those into carbon dioxide and ethanol. This is going to allow the bread to rise and get those really good pockets of air. Yeast is actually oblong, coarse in shape, and the most common type used in baking is active dry yeast. So active dry yeast just means that you have yeast that's alive inside of cells that are dead, which means you need to proof them before you use them, which is what we're doing right now. We're just making sure that you get enough water and nutrients as well as the warm environment to get them back to life.
As you can see, the yeast is doing its work. There are a lot of bubbles on the surface of this mixture. The most common yeast used in baking is a sac fungus called Saccharomyces cerevisiae, and the spores are able to germinate when they are in a warm environment, which is provided by the warm water, and this is also why we need a warm environment when the bread rises. In the process of germination, cells are released that are being reproduced by a process called budding. This process of reproduction is similar to binary fission, but differs in the fact that the resulting cells are not of equal size. Carbon dioxide is being released during this process.
After our yeast has been bubbling away for about 5 minutes, it's going to be time to add our dry ingredients to our wet ingredients. It's very important that when you're doing this kneading process that you make sure you're going to flour your surface if you're not using a KitchenAid mixer. So we're just going to add all of this in here, and we're going to knead it until so after we added this together, we're just going to keep this on and let it knead until the dough starts to cling to the hook. That's when we know that it's pretty much done kneading.
When you knead the bread together, you're adding strength to the bread. The main purpose of kneading is to really mix the flour and the water together, but it is also important so that gliadin and gluten and proteins can be stretched out to form strands of gluten. Gluten is what gives bread its strength and texture. Some recipes call for bread flour or whole wheat flour instead of all-purpose flour because these flours have a higher protein content than all-purpose flour. For example, today we're using the whole wheat flour because it has a higher protein content.
Once the dough has been formed, which is what it's doing right now, the protein strands are actually going to be warmed and stretched, which is going to help give rise to the elasticity of the bread. The elasticity of the bread is going to allow the bread to be able to hold those carbon dioxide pockets, which are going to form during the rising due to the yeast converting the sugar into carbon dioxide and ethanol.
Now it's time to let the bread rise. This process takes about 30 minutes but can vary depending on what sort of bread you're making. We are just going to grease the pan and put the bread in it and then put it in the oven that is slightly warm so that it has a warm environment for the bread to rise in. We've placed the bread in this greased pan and now we're going to let it rise for about 20 minutes.
It's rising! It's rising! It's risen!
Now we're going to bake it at 350 degrees for 15 to 20 minutes. Now the bread is done baking and we can eat it. And now you know the biology of making bread.